Mom's finally dying. Thank God. We can finally get our hands on that money. Those were the exact words I heard my son Roberto whisper to his sister Patricia in the hospital corridor, thinking I was unconscious from the morphine. But I wasn't. I was wide awake, listening to every single word that shattered my heart into a million pieces. I'm Aparecida Santos, 75 years old, and I spent my entire life building a textile empire worth over $3 million. More importantly, I spent 50 years believing that my 3 children loved me for who I was, not for what I had in my bank account. That Tuesday afternoon in November, lying in that sterile hospital bed, I discovered I had been living the biggest lie of my life. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled. You see, my dear friends, cancer has a funny way of opening your eyes to the truth. When the doctors gave me 6 months to live, I expected my children to rally around me with love and support. Instead, what I got was a masterclass in greed and manipulation that would make any soap opera writer jealous. She's been acting so weird lately, counting every penny, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with annoyance. Yesterday she questioned why I needed another $5,000 for Isabella's private school. It's like she doesn't trust us anymore. Roberto laughed bitterly. Well, she better get used to it. We've been patient long enough. Do you know how much money we could have made if we had invested our money properly instead of letting it sit in those conservative accounts? We've lost millions because of her stubbornness. My heart was racing so fast, I thought the monitors would start beeping and expose my awakened state. These were the same children I had sacrificed everything for. Roberto, my eldest, who I put through business school at Harvard. Patricia, my princess, whose wedding cost me $200,000. And Carlos, my baby, who was probably on his way to join this disgusting conversation. The lawyer said the reading is scheduled for next week after the funeral, Patricia whispered. Finally, we can sell that old factory in the house. I already talked to a realtor. That's when it hit me like a lightning bolt. They weren't just waiting for my money. They were planning my entire legacy's destruction before I was even dead. The factory where I started with nothing but determination and a sewing machine. The house where I raised them with love and sacrifice. Everything I built was nothing more than dollar signs in their greedy little minds. But here's what my dear children didn't know. Their mother didn't become a millionaire by being naive or weak. I built my fortune by being 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And this situation would be no different. As I lay there, listening to them divide up my life's work like vultures over a carcass, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to die as their victim. I was going to live long enough to teach them the most valuable lesson of their ungrateful lives. Let me take you back to understand how we got here, my dear friends. 50 years ago, I was Maria Aparecida Silva, a 25-year-old widow with 3 small children and exactly $47 to my name. My husband died in a factory accident, and his company gave me nothing but condolences and a cheap funeral. I remember sitting in our tiny rental house, surrounded by unpaid bills, watching my children sleep on mattresses on the floor. Roberto was only 5, Patricia was 3, and little Carlos was barely walking. The smell of cheap beans and rice filled our cramped kitchen every night. Sometimes that's all we had to eat for days. That's when I made a promise to myself and to them. We would never be poor again. I started with a borrowed sewing machine from my neighbor, Donna Maria. $10 down, $5 a month until I could pay it off. I would sew curtains, repair clothes, hem dresses, anything to make $1. My fingers were constantly pricked by needles, bleeding from working 16-hour days. But I never complained. The children were so small, so trusting. Roberto would bring me dandelions he picked from the yard, calling them Mama's flowers. Patricia would curl up next to me while I sewed late into the night, asking when Daddy was coming home. Carlos would toddle around with fabric scraps, building little houses and calling them our big house someday. Within 5 years, I had saved enough to open a small shop. Aparecida's Alterations, just me, that same sewing machine, and a dream bigger than our neighborhood. The smell of fabric starch and the sound of my Singer machine became the soundtrack of our new life. By the time the children were teenagers, we had moved to a real house. Not a mansion, mind you, but a home with separate bedrooms and a kitchen table where we could all sit together for dinner. I can still smell my mother's recipe for feijoada simmering on Sunday afternoons, with all of us laughing around that table. Roberto showed interest in business early. I was so proud when he got into Harvard Business School. Yes, it cost me $50,000. Money I didn't really have, but I sold my car and took out loans without hesitation. Education is the only inheritance I can give you that no one can steal, I told him. Patricia dreamed of being a princess. She wanted the big wedding, the white dress, the fairy tale. When she met James, I saw the stars in her eyes. $200,000 for that wedding seemed like a small price to pay for her happiness. I can still see her walking down the aisle, tears of joy streaming down my face as I watched my little girl become a woman. Carlos was my baby, my surprise child, my artist. When he wanted to study music in New York, I didn't hesitate to support his dreams. Rent, tuition, living expenses, whatever he needed. Follow your heart, meu filho, I would tell him. Mama will always be here. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The Sunday dinners became rarer, then non-existent. The phone calls became shorter, more focused on what they needed rather than how they were doing. The grandchildren I spoiled with expensive gifts barely knew my name. I started noticing things. Patricia only called when she needed money for Isabella's school or dance lessons. Roberto only visited when he wanted me to co-sign for business loans or investments. Carlos only showed up when his rent was due or when his music career needed funding. Still, I convinced myself it was normal. They were busy adults with their own lives. I was just being a sensitive old woman, right? I had raised successful, independent children. Isn't that what every mother wants? The first real warning sign came 6 months ago at Patricia's birthday dinner. I had just told them about my cancer diagnosis, and instead of comfort, I saw something else in their eyes. Relief? Anticipation? I couldn't put my finger on it then, but now I understand exactly what I was seeing. Greed. Pure, undiluted greed. After that devastating hospital conversation, I knew I needed proof. You can't fight a war with emotions alone. You need ammunition. And let me tell you, my dear friends, when a woman who built $1 million empire from nothing decides to investigate, she doesn't mess around. I started small, carefully. The first thing I did was install a tiny recording device in my purse, something I ordered online for security purposes. Technology these days makes it so easy to gather evidence. Roberto had insisted I learn to use a smartphone for emergencies, never knowing I would use it to record his true feelings about his dying mother. The evidence started piling up faster than I expected. Patricia's phone bill, which I still paid as part of the family plan, showed 47 calls to estate lawyers in the past month. 47 calls. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she was just being prepared and trying to help me organize my affairs. But when someone makes 47 calls to inheritance attorneys while their mother is fighting cancer, preparation isn't the motive, greed is. Roberto's credit card statements revealed something even more disturbing. While I was going through chemotherapy, barely able to keep food down, he had charged $15,000 in business dinners at high-end restaurants. The receipts showed parties of 4 to 6 people at places like Morton Steakhouse and the Capitol Grill. When I asked about his business expansion, he told me he was struggling and barely making ends meet. But here's the kicker. The reservation names on these receipts weren't for business associates. They were for Roberto Santos celebration dinner and Santos family investment planning. They were celebrating my death before I was even dead. Carlos, my artistic baby, had a credit report that made my blood pressure spike. He had opened 3 credit cards in the past 2 months, all with my address as his backup contact. The spending pattern was clear. Expensive recording equipment, a new car down payment, and this broke my heart. A $3,000 engagement ring for a girlfriend I had never even met. When I called and asked about his sudden financial activity, he actually had the audacity to tell me he was securing his future and making investments for when you're gone, Mom. Not if I die, but when... like my death was already scheduled in his calendar. The most damning evidence came from Patricia's teenage daughter, Isabella, my own granddaughter, who I had loved and spoiled since birth, accidentally sent me a text meant for a friend. Grandma's cancer is getting worse. Mom says we'll probably get the beach house in Florida once she dies. Finally can have those parties we talked about. A beach house in Florida? I had never mentioned any beach house. They weren't just planning to inherit my money. They were already planning how to spend it on luxuries I had never even considered buying. I hired Maria Santos, no relation, despite the same last name, a private investigator with 20 years of experience. What she discovered in just 2 weeks made my stomach turn. Roberto had already approached 3 different real estate developers about selling my factory property. He had gotten preliminary appraisals and was negotiating potential deals for future development. My life's work, the place where I had employed over 200 people for decades, was nothing but a development opportunity to him. Patricia had been meeting with financial advisors about inheritance planning and had already picked out a new house in the most expensive part of town. She told the realtor she would have liquid assets available within 6 months. Carlos had signed a lease for a recording studio in Nashville, with the first year's rent due upon receipt of inheritance funds. But the worst discovery was a group text thread Maria found between all 3 of my children. Messages like, "How much longer do you think she has?" And "The lawyer says we should prepare for the reading. And remember, act sad at the funeral, but don't overdo it." One message from Roberto made me physically sick. I talked to the accountant. After taxes and legal fees, we're looking at about $800,000 each. Not bad for waiting 50 years. $800,000 each. That's how they valued their mother's life. Not in memories, not in love, not in gratitude for the sacrifices I had made. Just cold, hard cash. That night, sitting in my empty house with all this evidence spread across my kitchen table, I cried for the first time since my diagnosis. Not because I was dying. I had made peace with that. I cried because the 3 people I loved most in this world saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between them and a payday. But then I stopped crying and started planning. Because if there's one thing I learned from building a business from nothing, it's that the best revenge isn't anger, it's strategy. The complete truth hit me like a freight train on a cold December morning, exactly 2 weeks after I hired Maria. She called me at 6 a.m. with a voice I'll never forget. The tone you use when you're about to deliver news that will change someone's life forever. "Mrs. Santos," she said, "I need you to sit down. What I discovered goes beyond inheritance planning. Your children have been actively working to accelerate your death." My hand started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean, accelerate?" "I have recordings, Mrs. Santos. They've been meeting with your doctor, Dr. Martinez, the man I had trusted with my life for 15 years. The man who held my hand during chemotherapy sessions and promised to fight this cancer with every tool in his arsenal. The man my children had insisted should handle all my medical care because they wanted only the best for Mama. Maria's investigation revealed that Roberto had been having private conversations with Dr. Martinez about quality of life and comfort care options. But these weren't conversations about my comfort. They were discussions about transitioning me to palliative care earlier than medically necessary. The recordings Maria obtained were devastating. Roberto's voice, clear as day, "Doctor, my mother is suffering so much. Isn't there a way to help her transition more peacefully? We just want what's best for her, and watching her fight like this is breaking our hearts." But here's what made it even more sinister. Patricia had been researching hospice care facilities, not for my comfort, but for the accelerated timeline. She had specifically asked about expected duration of care and average length of stay. She wasn't planning for my care. She was planning for my death schedule. Carlos, my baby, had been the one handling my medication schedule for the past month. Maria discovered he had been accidentally skipping some of my anti-nausea medications and reducing others. When I asked him about feeling worse lately, he would say, "It's just the cancer progressing, Mom. You need to accept that." Accept that? I was accepting that my own son was sabotaging my treatment to speed up his inheritance. But the most shocking discovery was a life insurance policy I didn't know existed. Roberto had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on me 6 months ago, listing himself as the beneficiary. The application was signed with what looked like my signature, but I had never seen this document in my life. When Maria showed me the signature analysis, it was clear Roberto had forged my name. My own son had committed insurance fraud, betting on my death like I was a racehorse. The policy had a 6-month waiting period for natural death claims. We were now in month 6. The timing of their sudden interest in comfort care and letting go wasn't coincidental. It was calculated. That evening, Patricia called me with fake concern in her voice. "Mom, you sounded so tired when we talked yesterday. Maybe it's time to consider that nice hospice facility I found. They have a beautiful garden, and you wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning anymore." For the first time in my life, I heard my daughter's voice and felt nothing but disgust. Roberto followed up with a text. "Spoke with Dr. Martinez today. He thinks transition to comfort care might be the best option for everyone involved. We just want you to be at peace, Mom." Everyone involved. Not just me. Everyone, including the life insurance company that would be writing him a check. Carlos called that night, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe fighting this cancer is causing you more pain than it's worth. Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to let go. We'll all be okay, I promise." They would all be okay. Financially, at least. That night, I sat in my kitchen with all of Maria's evidence spread before me like pieces of a horrific puzzle. Medical records showing unexplained gaps in treatment. Financial documents showing secret planning. Recorded conversations revealing their true feelings about their dying mother. The woman who had sacrificed everything for them, who had worked 16-hour days to give them opportunities one never had, who had celebrated every milestone and supported every dream. That woman was nothing more than a financial inconvenience they were actively trying to eliminate. I called Maria and asked her one simple question. How long do I really have if I continue proper treatment? According to the oncologist I consulted independently, she said, with aggressive treatment, you could have 2 to 3 years. Maybe more. Your children have been told you have months because that's what they wanted to hear. 2 to 3 years. Enough time to watch them continue the charade. Enough time to let them dig their own graves deeper. But most importantly, enough time to plan the most epic response to betrayal in family history. That's when I knew I wasn't dying anytime soon. But their dreams of easy money, those were about to flatline. And you, what would you do in this person's place? I would love to hear your opinion. So please share it with me in the comments. Now, my dear friends, this is where the real story begins. Because revenge isn't about getting mad. It's about getting smart. And after 50 years of outmaneuvering business competitors, I knew exactly how to handle family betrayers. The first step was securing my assets without arousing suspicion. I scheduled a meeting with my attorney, James Richardson, under pretense of updating my will due to my condition. But instead of the will they expected, I was creating something entirely different. I transferred my factory shares into a trust, with myself as the primary beneficiary during my lifetime. The trust had a very specific clause. If anyone contested the will or showed documented evidence of trying to accelerate my death, they would receive exactly $1. $1 for each year of the betrayal. My house, worth $800,000, was quietly transferred to another trust. This one had an interesting condition. It could only be inherited by someone who provided genuine care and emotional support during my illness, with evidence required from medical professionals and third-party witnesses. The cash assets, over $1.2 million in various accounts, required the most delicate maneuvering. I opened new accounts at different banks, slowly transferring funds in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic reports. Roberto monitored my main account regularly. I had given him access for emergencies. So I left exactly enough money there to maintain his illusion of a massive inheritance coming. But here's where my plan got really creative. I decided to give them exactly what they were asking for. I called Dr. Martinez and scheduled a meeting. "Doctor," I said, "my children seem very concerned about my comfort level. I want to understand all my options for pain management and quality of life. During that meeting, I recorded everything. When he started suggesting comfort care transitions that aligned suspiciously with Roberto's earlier conversations, I knew he was compromised. So I played along. You know what, doctor? Maybe Roberto is right. Maybe it is time to stop fighting and focus on making my remaining time peaceful. Dr. Martinez's relief was palpable. I think that a very wise decision, Mrs. Santos. Your family will be so relieved to see you at peace. My family would be relieved. All right, just not in the way he imagined. I started making calls to hospice facilities, asking detailed questions about their services. But these weren't the facilities Patricia had recommended. These were the most expensive, luxurious hospice centers in the state, places that cost $15,000 per month for care. When Patricia called to check on my decision, I delivered my performance like an Oscar-winning actress. Minna Filha, you were right. I'm tired of fighting. I found a beautiful hospice place, but it's very expensive. I might need to use most of my savings to afford it. Most of your savings? Her voice cracked with panic. Well, the place costs $15,000 a month, and they require 6 months paid in advance. But it has a beautiful garden, like you said was important. The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Mom, maybe we should look at some more affordable options? Oh no, darling. You said you wanted the best for me. And after talking to Dr. Martinez, I realized I might need care for longer than we thought. Maybe a year or more. A year of $15,000 per month would eat up most of my liquid assets. I could practically hear her calculator working through the phone. Roberto called within an hour. Mom, Patricia told me about the hospice place. Don't you think we should be more practical about your care options? Practical? Roberto, my son, I thought you wanted your mother to be comfortable in her final days. Of course. But maybe comfortable doesn't have to mean expensive. Oh, but I've already put down the deposit. $90,000. Non-refundable, but they assured me it's the finest care available. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, $90,000? Yes. And I'll need to pay another $90,000 in 3 months for the second installment. But don't worry, I have enough saved to cover it. I might need to sell some of my jewelry and maybe take a loan against the house. But what good is money if I can't use it for my own care? That night, I received more phone calls from my children than I had gotten in the previous 6 months combined. Suddenly, they were all very concerned about my hasty decision and wanted to explore all options together. Carlos even offered to move back home to take care of me personally. Mom, you don't need expensive hospice care. I can cook and clean and make sure you take your medications. We can be together like when he was little, before he learned to forge signatures and sabotage treatments. The next phase of my plan involved a family attorney, James Richardson. I scheduled a will reading for 2 weeks for my decision to enter hospice care. But I told my children it was just to finalize some details and make sure everything was in order. I want all of you there, I told them, and I want some special guests too, people who have been important in my life. They agreed eagerly, probably imagining themselves sitting around a conference table while Mr. Richardson read off their inheritance amounts like lottery numbers. Little did they know, I was planning to give them the lottery experience of a lifetime, the kind where you scratch off the ticket and find out you've won absolutely nothing. The guest list for my will reading was very carefully crafted. Maria Elena, my factory manager who had worked beside me for 30 years. Carmen Rodriguez, the housekeeper who had cleaned my home and listened to my problems for 15 years. Father Miguel from the church, and several representatives from children's charities I had been quietly supporting for years. My children assumed these were people who would witness their inheritance. They had no idea these were the people who would be their inheritance's new owners. But the masterpiece of my plan was still to come. Because I wasn't just going to take their inheritance away. I was going to make them watch it go to people who actually deserved it, while the whole world witnessed their true character. The day of the will reading arrived with the kind of crisp January air that makes everything feel sharp and clear. I had chosen the conference room at Richardson and Associates specifically because it had large windows facing the street. I wanted plenty of natural light for what was about to happen. My children arrived early, dressed in their finest grieving family attire. Roberto wore his most expensive suit, the one I had bought him for his Harvard graduation. Patricia had chosen a conservative black dress with pearls, the same pearls I had given her for her wedding. Carlos showed up in a dark blazer that still had the price tag tucked inside the collar. I could see it when he hugged me. They were practically vibrating with anticipation. Maria Elena arrived with a folder of documents. 30 years of factory records, employee testimonials, and photographs of every company milestone. Carmen brought a scrapbook filled with pictures of family celebrations she had witnessed, birthday parties she had helped organize, and holiday dinners she had served. Father Miguel carried a list of every charitable contribution I had made to the church. Contributions my children knew nothing about. But the surprise guests were the representatives from 3 different children's charities: Casa de Esperanza, House of Hope, an orphanage I had been supporting anonymously for 5 years; Instituto Futuro Brillante, Bright Future Institute, a scholarship fund for underprivileged children; and Lar dos Pequeninos, Little One's Home, a foster care facility. Roberto's eyes narrowed when he saw the charity representatives. "Mom, why are there so many people here? I thought this was just a family meeting." "Oh, meu filho, these people are family too. They've been part of my life in ways you might not understand." Patricia looked uncomfortable. "But Mom, shouldn't inheritance discussions be private?" "Private?" I smiled sweetly. "Why would they be private? I'm not ashamed of anything I'm doing. Are you ashamed of anything you've done?" Carlos shifted nervously in his seat. "Of course not, Mom. We just want to make sure your wishes are honored." "My wishes will be honored, meu querido." Perfectly honored. James Richardson entered the room carrying not one will, but a thick folder of documents. Behind him came 2 additional witnesses, a court stenographer and a video recording specialist. "Mrs. Santos has requested that today's proceedings be fully documented," Mr. Richardson announced. "This is highly unusual, but entirely legal and at her specific insistence." Roberto, Patricia, and Carlos exchanged worried glances. This wasn't going according to their script. "Before we begin with the will," I announced, standing up with more strength than I had shown in months, "I want to share some things with everyone here. Some discoveries I've made during my illness that have changed my perspective on family and love." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small recording device. This is from a conversation I overheard in the hospital. I said, "Pressing play." Roberto's voice filled the room. "Mom's finally dying. Thank God. We can finally get our hands on that money." The color drained from all 3 of their faces. Patricia looked like she was about to faint. Carlos actually stood up as if to leave, but I gestured for him to sit back down. "Oh, but there's more," I continued, pulling out printed documents. "Like this life insurance policy, Roberto, that you took out on me without my knowledge, using a forged signature." I handed copies to Mr. Richardson and to the court stenographer. "And these credit reports showing how all 3 of you have been spending money you don't have, betting on my death." Patricia started crying. Not the gentle tears of grief, but the ugly sobs of someone caught in a lie. "Mom, you don't understand. We were just trying to be prepared." "Prepared?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Patricia, you made 47 calls to estate attorneys while I was getting chemotherapy. Carlos, you put a down payment on a recording studio using inheritance funds as collateral. Roberto, you've been meeting with real estate developers to sell my factory." The charity representatives were taking notes. Maria Elena looked disgusted. Carmen was shaking her head in disbelief. Father Miguel had his hands clasped in prayer. "But the best part," I continued, "was discovering that you've been working with Dr. Martinez to transition me to palliative care unnecessarily, to speed up your inheritance timeline." Roberto found his voice. "Mom, everything we did was out of love." "Love." I stood up and walked to where he was sitting. "Roberto, Amor doesn't forge signatures on insurance policies. Love doesn't celebrate someone's death before they're dead. Love doesn't sabotage cancer treatments." I turned to address the room. For 50 years, I built a business from nothing to provide for these 3 children. I worked 16-hour days, sacrificed my own comfort, and gave them every opportunity one never had. And in return, they saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between them and a payday. The room was dead silent, except for Patricia's continued sobbing. So now, I said, sitting back down and nodding to Mr. Richardson, let's read my will and see how love is truly rewarded. Mr. Richardson opened the folder and began reading, I, Maria Aparecida Santos, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my estate as follows. My children leaned forward in anticipation. To my son Roberto Santos, who taught me that blood doesn't always mean loyalty, I leave the sum of $1. Roberto's mouth fell open. What? To my daughter Patricia Santos Williams, who showed me that expensive weddings don't guarantee loving hearts, I leave the sum of $1. Patricia's sobs turned into gasps of disbelief. To my son Carlos Santos, who demonstrated that artistic dreams can coexist with greedy schemes, I leave the sum of $1. Carlos looked like he'd been slapped. The remainder of my estate, valued at approximately $2.8 million, including my factory, my home, and all liquid assets, I leave as follows. 1/3 to Maria Elena Vasquez, my factory manager, who showed me more loyalty in 30 years than my children showed in 50. 1/3 to be divided equally among Casa de Esperanza, Instituto Futuro Brillante, and Lar dos Pequeninos, organizations that understand the value of nurturing children with love, not greed. And 1/3 to Carmen Rodriguez, who cleaned my home and listened to my heart with more genuine care than my own flesh and blood. The silence was deafening. Maria Elena was crying, but these were tears of shock and gratitude. Carmen had her hands over her mouth in disbelief. The charity representatives were furiously taking notes. Roberto exploded. You can't do this. We're your children. That money belongs to us. That money belongs to whoever I choose to give it to. I replied calmly, and I choose to give it to people who actually love me. Patricia was hyperventilating. Mom, please, you're not thinking clearly. The cancer, the medications. The cancer that you wanted to progress faster? The medications that Carlos was accidentally skipping? I stood up again. My mind has never been clearer. Carlos tried a different approach. Mom, we made mistakes, but we're still your family. Give us another chance. I gave you 50 years of chances, meu filho. I gave you every opportunity to show me love instead of greed. This is what you chose. The video was still recording. The stenographer was documenting every word. And my 3 children were finally seeing the consequences of treating their mother like a walking ATM machine. The will has been properly witnessed and notarized, Mr. Richardson announced. These proceedings are legally binding. I looked at my children one last time. You wanted your inheritance? You got it. $1 each. Exactly what your love for me was worth. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours of the will reading, my phone was ringing constantly. Roberto called 17 times before I finally answered. Mom, you have to reconsider. This is insane. We're your children. Yes, you are my children, I replied calmly. And you spent months planning my death like it was a business transaction. Tell me, Roberto, what did you think would happen when I found out? We never wanted you to die. We were preparing for the inevitable. The inevitable that you were trying to accelerate with Dr. Martinez. The inevitable you insured for $500,000 with my forged signature. Silence. Patricia showed up at my house that evening, bringing little Isabella with her. My granddaughter ran into my arms like she always did, and for a moment, my heart softened. Then Patricia started talking. Mom, I'm willing to forgive you for this crazy stunt, but you need to fix this situation before it goes too far. Isabella needs her inheritance for college. Isabella needs her inheritance? I looked down at my granddaughter, who was playing with her expensive iPhone, the one I had bought her for Christmas. Isabella. Querida, do you know how Grandma made her money? You had a business, right? Making clothes? That's right. And I started that business when your mom was your age, working 16 hours a day so she could have a better life. What do you want to be when you grow up? A teacher, Isabella said without hesitation. A teacher? How wonderful. I looked at Patricia. Teachers don't need million-dollar inheritances to be happy. They need education, integrity, and the satisfaction of helping others. Maybe Isabella can learn those values from her new college fund. What new college fund? The one Instituto Futuro Brillante will establish in my name. Isabella can apply for a scholarship like any other deserving child. If she earns it through good grades and good character, she'll get her education funding. Patricia's face turned red. You're punishing Isabella for our mistakes. I'm teaching Isabella that money isn't guaranteed in life. It's earned. Something I should have taught you better. Carlos took a different approach. He showed up with his girlfriend, Sarah, and got down on his knees in my living room. Mom, I know we messed up, but I love you. We all love you. And I want you to meet Sarah. She's the woman I want to marry. Sarah was lovely, young, sweet, genuinely kind. She had no idea about the inheritance drama and clearly cared about Carlos for himself, not his family's money. It's wonderful to meet you, Sarah, I said warmly. Carlos. She seemed like a lovely girl. She is, Mom, and we want to start our life together right. But with the music industry being so difficult, we really need some financial help to get started. There it was. Even his marriage proposal was contingent on my money. Carlos, let me ask you something. If I had no money at all, if I was just a poor old woman with cancer, would you still be here asking for my blessing on your marriage? He hesitated just long enough to give me my answer. Sarah, I said, turning to his girlfriend, did Carlos tell you he was expecting to inherit millions from his dying mother? Her face went pale. No, he said you were comfortable, but that he needed to make his own way in the world. Interesting. Because he actually took out credit cards and signed a recording studio lease based on inheriting my money. Sarah looked at Carlos with confusion and hurt. You told me you had savings for studio. I do have savings. I was going to have savings. Carlos couldn't finish the sentence because there was no honest way to complete it. Sarah excused herself and left. I heard later that she broke up with him that same night. Apparently, building a relationship on lies about dead mother money wasn't her idea of a solid foundation. But the most dramatic confrontation came from Roberto. He hired a lawyer and threatened to contest the will on grounds of mental incompetence due to illness. His attorney, Michael Stevens, called my lawyer with their demands. Mrs. Santos was clearly not in her right mind when she made these decisions. Cancer patients on medication often make irrational choices. We're prepared to fight this. That's when James Richardson played his trump card, something we had prepared for exactly the scenario. Mr. Stevens, I have here a complete psychological evaluation of Mrs. Santos, conducted by Dr. Patricia Wilkins, one of the state's leading geriatric psychiatrists. The evaluation was done just 2 days before the will was signed. Dr. Wilkins found Mrs. Santos to be completely competent, with above-average cognitive function and perfect understanding of her decisions. Furthermore, Richardson continued, we have documented evidence that your clients attempted to defraud Mrs. Santos through forged insurance documents, medical manipulation, and inheritance fraud. If you proceed with this contest, we will file countersuits for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The contest was dropped within a week. Maria Elena came to see me a few days after the dust settled. She was still in shock about her inheritance. Senora Aparecida, I don't know what to say. This is more money than I ever dreamed of having. Maria Elena, you worked beside me for 30 years. You stayed late when we had big orders. You covered for me when I was sick. You treated my business like it was your own family. You earned every penny. But your children... My children showed me who they really are. You showed me who you really are. The choice was easy. Carmen was even more overwhelmed. Dona Aparecida, I just clean houses. I don't deserve this kind of money. Carmen, you did more than clean houses. You listened when I was lonely. You celebrated my birthdays when my children forgot. You worried about my health when my children were worried about my bank account. You gave me something more valuable than money. You gave me genuine care. The charity representatives sent me the most beautiful letters. Casa de Esperanza, would be able to expand the facility and help 50 more orphan children. Instituto Futuro Brillante could provide full scholarships to 200 underprivileged students. Lar dos Pequeninos could hire more social workers and improve their foster care programs. My money would touch hundreds of lives in positive ways. Compare that to my children's plans: expensive cars, bigger houses, and recording studios. But the real validation came from unexpected sources. Neighbors who had watched my children's behavior over the years came forward with stories I had never heard. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door told me she had seen Roberto going through my mailbox several times, looking for financial statements. The mailman, Mr. Johnson, said Patricia had tried to intercept packages addressed to me, claiming she was helping her sick mother with correspondence. Even Dr. Martinez's nurse, Linda, called to apologize. She had been uncomfortable with the family meetings about transitioning me to palliative care, but hadn't known how to speak up. Mrs. Santos, your children kept pushing for comfort care only, even when your test results showed you were responding well to treatment. It didn't feel right, but I thought maybe they knew something I didn't. They knew something, all right. They knew exactly how much money they stood to inherit, and exactly how long they wanted to wait for it. The most satisfying moment came when Roberto made one final attempt at reconciliation. He showed up at my door with flowers. Cheap ones from the grocery store, not even a real bouquet. Mom, I've been thinking, maybe we can work something out. I'll take care of you, and you can change the will back. I promise I'll be a better son. Roberto, do you remember what you said to Patricia in the hospital corridor? Mom, I was upset. I didn't mean... You said, Mom's finally dying, thank God. Thank God, Roberto. You thanked God that your mother was dying. I was emotional. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed. And the life insurance policy you took out on me, the forged signature, was that also emotional stress? He couldn't answer. Roberto, I spent 50 years teaching you values through my actions. I worked myself to exhaustion to give you opportunities. I sacrificed my own comfort for your success. And despite all of that, you learned that love is conditional and family is transactional. I failed as your mother, but I won't compound that failure by rewarding your behavior. He left without another word. That evening, as I sat in my quiet house, the house that now belonged to Carmen, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the peace of giving up, but the peace of standing up for what's right. My children had taught me that blood doesn't make family. Love makes family. Loyalty makes family. Genuine care makes family. And by that definition, Maria Elena, Carmen, and those children in the orphanages were more my family than the 3 people I had raised. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment, a beautiful 2-bedroom place that Carmen insisted I keep living in rent-free, since the house is now hers. The chemo treatments are working better than anyone expected, and my prognosis has improved dramatically. Funny how much better you heal when you're not surrounded by people secretly hoping you'll die faster. If you like my story, you can support me by making a donation so I can write more stories. Thank you in advance. For more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you. Maria Elena has transformed the factory in ways I never imagined. She's implemented profit-sharing programs for all employees and started a daycare center for working mothers. The business is thriving under her leadership, and she calls me every week for advice, not because she has to, but because she values my experience. Carmen sold my house to a lovely young family and used part of her inheritance to buy a smaller home for herself, debt-free. She's also started a house-cleaning business, employing other women who need steady income. She named it Aparecida's Angels in my honor, which made me cry happy tears for the first time in years. The charities have been sending me updates that fill my heart with joy. Casa de Esperanza sent me a photo album showing their expansion. Bright new bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and a playground where dozens of children play every day. One little girl, Anna, wrote me a letter. Thank you, Dona Aparecida, for giving me a home where people love me just because I exist. Just because she exists, not because of what she can give them or what she's worth financially, just because she exists. That's the kind of love I thought I was giving my children, and it's the kind of love they never learned to give back. Instituto Futuro Brillante has awarded 47 scholarships so far. I receive graduation announcements, wedding invitations, and birth announcements from young people who escaped poverty through education. Their success stories are my greatest treasure. Roberto, Patricia, and Carlos have all tried different approaches to reconciliation over these months. Roberto sent me a lawyer's letter offering to forget the past and move forward as a family if I would reconsider my estate planning decisions. His love, apparently, is still conditional on my money. Patricia brought Isabella to see me once more, but this time Isabella surprised both of us. She had learned about the whole situation from her friends at school. News travels fast in small communities, and had some pointed questions for her mother. "Grandma," Isabella said, "Mom told me you gave away our money. But it wasn't really our money, was it? It was your money." "That's right, Querida. And Mom and Uncle Roberto and Uncle Carlos were mean to you when you were sick?" Patricia looked mortified. "Isabella, it's complicated." "It doesn't sound complicated," Isabella interrupted. "It sounds like they were greedy and you were hurt." This wise little girl, only 12 years old, understood what 3 grown adults couldn't grasp. Money doesn't make you entitled to more money. "Isabella," I said, "would you like to hear about the scholarship program I set up?" Her eyes lit up. "You mean I could still go to college?" "If you work hard, study well, and show good character, there will be money available for your education. But you'll have to earn it through your own merit, not through inheritance." "I think that's better," she said. "Then I'll know I deserved it." Patricia left in tears, but Isabella hugged me tight before going. "I love you, Grandma, and I'm sorry my mom was mean to you. Carlos has been the most persistent in trying to make amends. He sends me flowers every week and calls to tell me about his life. He broke up with Sarah, she was too good for him anyway, and moved back to town, working at a local music store while trying to rebuild his recording career the honest way. "Mom," he said during his last visit, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that losing your trust hurt more than losing the money. Did it, meu filio? Because when you thought you were getting the money, you were perfectly fine with having lost my trust." He had no answer for that. But here's the thing about forgiveness. It's not the same as trust, and it's definitely not the same as rewarding bad behavior. I've forgiven my children for their betrayal because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts them. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never happened or giving them what they tried to steal from me. I've made peace with the fact that I raised children who confuse love with money. Maybe I worked too much when they were young. Maybe I gave them too much without teaching them to appreciate it. Maybe I showed them that problems could be solved with money instead of character. But their choices as adults were their own. They chose greed over gratitude. They chose deception over honesty. They chose to see their mother as a commodity rather than a person. The most beautiful part of this whole experience has been discovering what real family looks like. Maria Elena calls me every Sunday, not to ask for anything, but to share her week and ask about mine. Carmen brings me homemade soup when I don't feel well, and we watch telenovelas together while laughing about the ridiculous plot twists. Father Miguel visits regularly to play chess and discuss philosophy. The children from Casa de Esperanza send me drawings and thank you cards that decorate my refrigerator like proud grandmother artwork. These people didn't know about my money when they started caring about me. They loved me when I was just a sick old woman who needed kindness. That's when you learn who your real family is. Not when you're healthy and wealthy, but when you're vulnerable and need genuine support. My health continues to improve, much to everyone's surprise, except my children's, I'm sure. The new oncologist I switched to, Dr. Sarah Chun, who has no relationship with my family, says my response to treatment has been remarkable. Turns out, when you're not being secretly sabotaged by your own son, cancer treatments work much better. I've started volunteering at Casa de Esperanza twice a week, reading stories to the younger children and teaching basic sewing skills to the older ones. These kids have nothing but each other, yet they share everything freely in love without conditions. They've taught me more about family values in 6 months than my biological children learned in 50 years. Yesterday, little Anna, the one who wrote me the letter, asked me if I had any children of my own. I looked around at the dozens of faces surrounding me during story time. Children who had been abandoned, neglected, or orphaned, but who still had capacity for pure, uncomplicated love. Yes, Mija, I told her, I have many, many children. And for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. My biological children gave me the greatest gift they possibly could, though they'll never understand it. They showed me that DNA doesn't create family bonds. Love does. Character does. Loyalty does. Genuine care does. I may not have much time left in this world, but whatever time I have will be spent surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not what I own. And when I do finally pass away, my legacy won't be 3 bitter adults fighting over money. It will be hundreds of children who learn that they matter, students who achieve their dreams through education, and working people who are treated with dignity and respect. That's the inheritance I'm proudest of. That's the family I choose to leave behind. And Roberto, Patricia, and Carlos, they got exactly what they deserved, $1 each, and a lesson in the true cost of greed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well and loving better. My name is Maria Aparessa de Santos. I'm 75 years old, and I'm finally surrounded by the family I always deserved. The end. Legacy Master, where love matters more than money.